and welcome to another edition of the Security Ledger Hangout. I'm your host, Paul Roberts, and we're here today speaking with Paul Rosenzweig, who is, and Paul, did I say your right name correctly?
Rosenzweig.
Rosenzweig. Okay.
It's okay. Doesn't matter.
Okay.
Rosenzweig is as good as it gets.
Okay, except that it's Rosenzweig. Paul Rosenzweig, founder and principal of Red Branch Consulting. Paul does many things. He's a Homeland Security consultant. That's what Red Branch is about. He also serves as a senior advisor to the Chertoff Group, and he was formerly Deputy Assistant Secretary for Policy in the Department of Homeland Security. He's a distinguished visiting fellow at the Homeland Security Studies and Analysis Institute, and a lecturer in law at George Washington University. He's a senior editor of the Journal of National Security Law and Policy and a visiting fellow at the Heritage Foundation. We're very, very happy to have Paul with us here on the Security Ledger Hangout. Paul, I heard you talk out at a private gathering that happened around the Black Hat Conference out in Las Vegas back in early August, and was really taken by a lot of your thoughts. Why don't you just start by talking a little bit about your background, what you do, and kind of where your interests are?
Well, great. And first off, thanks for having me. It's really a great pleasure to join you. I love doing stuff like this, and it's always interesting and engaging. So I appreciate the opportunity to come on.
Our pleasure.
I am I like to call myself a lapsed lawyer. I'm a lawyer by training. I got my law degree from the University of Chicago about nearly 30 years ago. And for a long while, I was mostly just a regular legal practitioner. But in the last 15 years or so, my interests have trended much more towards Homeland Security, and even more recently towards cybersecurity and national security issues. So what I did in the government and what I do today is a lot of consulting, talking, and teaching about cybersecurity issues broadly writ, including legal issues relating to criminal and civil liability, but also including things relating to what we do in Washington here, the development of policy and practice and new legislation that is going to guide the cyber realm for the next 3 to 5 years.
One of the things that I heard you talking about out at Black Hat was this sort of revolution that we're writing about at the Security Ledger a lot, the Internet of Things, the Internet of Machines, some have called it, the Internet of Everything. And you made a lot of really interesting connections to sort of legal revolutions or changes that have happened in the last 20 or 30 years as a way of looking at how our economy and our society might adjust to the changes brought by, all of this internet-connected stuff that's starting to pop up in our environments. Maybe talk a little bit about that. You brought up the whole idea of liability and automobiles and unsafe at any speed. That whole movement in the 60s and early 70s as a way to think about what might be coming our way with Internet of Things.
I think that's right. I mean, it's always dangerous, of course, to reason by analogy and to make your conclusions based on the past. But Santayana said that those who forget history are doomed to repeat it, and we may, I think, be doomed in the near future to repeat some of the mistakes of an earlier era if we don't kind of learn from it. The arc of liability for automobiles is pretty well documented and pretty historically settled. At first, a large number of automotive products were constructed that had pretty substantial safety defects in them. And it was not really that the engineers were unaware of these defects, but it really was that the companies that were constructing the products did a sort of cost-benefit analysis, rushed their products to market, and determined that the defects were not worth spending the money to fix, there was a reason for that. And the reason was that the prevailing doctrine at the time that they made these decisions was that essentially they weren't liable to anybody who was injured by their defective products. The predominant legal doctrine was caveat emptor, let the buyer beware. And so if you bought a car and the car had a defect that made it turn off or made it dangerous in an accident, that was essentially your problem, the consumer's problem. Then along came a very, famous series of incidents, Ralph Nader, unsafe at any speed, and then the one that really sticks in people's minds was the Pinto and the exploding gas tanks, which were clearly known to the engineers at Pinto. There was a solution. It was on the order of a couple $100 solution, and Pinto had made a very conscious decision not to fix it. And what that generated was a movement to change the legal doctrine, to make automotive manufacturers liable for the defects in their cars if they were reasonably capable of being fixed. And what that produced, of course, was a lot safer cars. Highway deaths are way, way down now than they were 20, 30, 40 years ago. But at some expense, increased safety. And it also produced car companies that market themselves as the uber safe companies, like Volvo and things like that. Everybody knows that Volvo is the safest car around. I'm not sure if that's still true, but they won the public relations battle, at least with me. So let's take that entire story and think about it with respect to the Internet of Things, with respect to driverless cars that are coming from Google, or medical devices that people are manufacturing. We are, I think, probably at the same place that the automotive industry was before the liability revolution, before unsafe at any speed, and before the Pinto explosions. We're at a place where people are rushing into the market to create new products. And by the way, I should say, these are great products. I mean, all of the Internet of Things is going to be an immense benefit to humanity in terms of productivity, safety, convenience, all that sort of stuff. So nothing I want to say should say we should stop with the Internet of Things in any way. But we're rushing to market with medical devices with known security flaws that are someday going to be exploited. And people will die. And we're going to have that Pinto moment sometime in the near future. And the law of liability is likely to shift. And the people who are better positioned to take advantage of that shift are the people who are thinking about the security of the Internet of Things from that perspective today. I mean, we were at Black Hat together, and every other talk, right, was about some new hack of some piece of equipment that you could break into and make act in ways unanticipated by their designers, whether it was TSA body scanners, medical devices, cars, you name it, right? So I think that the time is coming for a liability revolution in cyberspace where the manufacturers of devices and the code writers for those devices are going to have to think about whether or not they've taken reasonable steps to secure them. That's a long answer, I'm sorry, but that's the basic outline.
It's a good answer. It's a good answer. No, I think that, and I think one of the sort of mental shifts that has to take place is, I think there's a presumption often that, well, of course a car maker would never release a car that had a security defect that might kill somebody because of, the damage to their brand and the bad publicity. They would never have an incentive to do that. And I think one of the things when you listen to you talk or go back and read what was happening at the time is actually that's not true at all. Companies make very they might not say, oh, it's okay if a few people die because of this, because it's still going to cost us less in the long run. But from a business standpoint, they may well reach that conclusion if the conversation is, what is the cost of changing the design of this product versus the likelihood that something bad's going to happen as a result of the design. I wonder, and you, I know, have talked to and worked with the I Am the Cavalry people. This at the most recent DEF CON, there was an announcement or an open letter to the auto industry, basically saying, you know, you need to bring your game up when it comes to the security of the software that's running in your automobiles. Do you think this is an area in which automakers have learned a tremendous amount about vehicle safety and protecting passengers from accidents, may be again vulnerable to those types of criticisms of, you know, you put this feature in without a real really paying attention to how well it was engineered or how it might be attacked or compromised?
You know, there's a lot of moving parts in your question, a lot of different pieces. I mean, part of it, I think, is why people don't pay attention to security is calculation of cost. Part of it, though, is novelty. There's a number of, you know, vulnerabilities in the car industry that probably people didn't think of before they became prominent. It just wasn't on their radar screen. And you know, we're kind of at that point as well in car manufacturing. There's so much value in adding computer-driven controls to your car, better braking, better safety, all sorts of great things, that they're rushing to do this without really thinking about the security. So one of the really great things that happened at DEF CON that you mentioned was this open letter from I Am the Cavalry, which is a group that I'm associated with. I give them some advice. So full disclosure, though I'm by no means a security researcher or a coder, so I just provide them kind of legal stuff. But in which they said to the auto industry, you know, this is a vulnerability, and maybe you're just not aware of it. But here are, you know, they gave them a 5-point plan that involved, you know, transparency in development, easy ways to report bugs, rapid response and correction of bugs, segregation of critical systems from non-critical systems, a whole 9 yards. That was a really great outline for what it is we would think or hope the auto industry could do to kind of ramp up their security. And we've already seen some positive expressions coming back from the auto industry. It's not that they're resistant, it's that they're waiting to be educated and hoping to learn and hoping to be driven, yeah, that's the bad word, driven, hoping to be moved in the right direction by market forces. Tesla, for example, you know, I mean, that's a high-end car, so they've actually embraced the security model as not just an expense, but as a product differentiator, which in the end, I think brand recognition is going to turn on cyber safety of your cars as much as it does on whether or not it corners well. So we're at the start of a process that is an educative one, that is a persuasive one, that is really lots of carrots for good behavior, and then eventually there's going to be sticks for bad behavior.
And the sticks presumably would be legislation, either I guess it would have to be at the federal level or more private sector, you know, U.S. Or Consumer Reports pans you because you know, your car failed some kind of a cyber evaluation.
Pick one from column A, one from column B. I think it's likely to be both. I could see, we'll stay with cars, though I don't want to pick exclusively on cars because there are lots of other devices out there. But let's stick with cars. I can imagine the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration issuing standards about cybersecurity. Things like you should segregate non-critical systems like the computer that runs the audio system from the critical systems, the systems that run your brakes and gas injection. I could imagine that. I could imagine Consumer Reports or you know, publishing you know, with a little red bullet that says "not good on cyber" and adding a column like that. I can imagine a little further down the road American tort lawyers getting the first day that one of these cars crashes because a cyber system either is hacked by somebody who's malevolent through a known vulnerability, or, you know, seizes up and freezes in the middle of a turn because of some coding flaw that ought to have been spotted. The day that happens, we're going to have tort lawyers, coming out of the woodwork and making some money off of the deal. And money always drives the equation. So there's lots of things that are. I mean, another possible avenue, one that I often think about and do some counseling on, is someday your and my insurance company, before it insures us against accidents in the car, is going to ask us as a condition of insurance, is your car cyber secure? In the same way that they ask now, do you have a good driving record, right? And does it have a good crash rating from NHTSA? They're going to ask if it has a good cyber rating. And if they start asking me that, I'll start asking the manufacturer, and then the manufacturers will start thinking about that because they want to sell better cars. So I don't know exactly where the pressure point is going to come from, because it's this integrated system with lots of moving parts, but somebody's going to take it into their head.
What role is Congress going to play, lawmakers in Washington, D.C., their track record on cyber legislation of any kind, whether it's Computer Fraud and Abuse Act or Digital Millennium Copyright Act, is kind of spotty, and cyber-related legislation's been caught up in the same logjam that pretty much every other kind of legislation has been as well. So how much relief or guidance or forward-looking legislation can the manufacturing, medical device, technology industry really expect from lawmakers in Washington, D.C.?
That's a great question. Nobody makes any money. Nobody ever lost any money here in Washington betting on Congress to do nothing, at least not in the last few years. So the realist in me says, expect nothing. One of the reasons that I actually think that there might be movement in this area, not in the very near term, but in the mid to long term, is because if there isn't, then there will be 50 different state rules about what's required. One rule in West Virginia, another rule in California, and another rule in North Dakota. And if there's one thing industry hates, it's inconsistent rules, multiple rules that they have to comply with. So when and if a rulemaking or liability system starts getting going, I expect that there will be pushes for nationwide uniformity.
Yeah, but
that will probably drive congressional action.
We heard that argument with data breach laws, and as yet it has not happened.
That's right. I think that's probably because the pain hasn't gotten big enough,
Yeah, maybe.
And frankly, I'm a bit surprised that we haven't managed to get data breach fixes off over the finish line. I would have hoped that we could, and I would have expected that. But that's the argument, right? And what it is based on the idea that money drives the calendar. Money drives the method. We'll see. I mean, that prediction is really looking out 3-5 years from now. Certainly in the next presidency, and at least, and no sooner than that. For other things that they can expect in Washington, that doesn't mean that there isn't scope for executive action. We could have the Food and Drug Administration deciding that it is going to impose some standards on medical devices for cybersecurity. We could have NHTSA talking about auto security. We could, have the Consumer Product Safety Commission putting out standards about other consumer devices that are within its domain that are cyber-enabled, that are potentially hackable. I'm not sure how much I like that. I really don't want a cybersecurity standard for my refrigerator. I just don't see the need. I mean, who cares about whether or not they find out how much milk I drink each week? With my computer. But there are other devices that will be.
Right. Well, and can that refrigerator be a stepping stone to an attack on the machine that does run your Quicken or
if you start seeing home consumer devices as pathways to my laptop or my home security device, for example.
Right.
Why anybody would make their home security devices internet enabled is beyond me. But that's another story altogether.
So if you're a company and you're in the, let's say you're making a consumer device or an automobile or something that you are thinking of adding connectivity features to it. Josh Corman, who we both know, jokes about Bluetooth being like bacon. Everything tastes better with Bluetooth. What are some of the concerns that you should have from a sort of legal standpoint about your liability or about the risks that those might impose? In other words, if you were to consult with a company and say, look, if you want to build connectivity features into this, and this is a product that conceivably could be hacked and or cause harm or damage, what types of things should you be sensitive to or aware of? Where should you be devoting your energies?
Well, I mean, my first question would not be a legal question. It would be, does connectivity really enhance this product? Because you're building in an uncertainty and a vulnerability, and not everything tastes better with bacon. Vanilla ice cream does not, in my judgment. And not everything is better with Bluetooth or with internet connectivity.
Right.
So I would just, my first question would be to ask them why, what the business case model is for this and whether or not the game is worth the can. That having been said, if the company makes a determination that connectivity is an important piece of it, I would say that they should begin by thinking about the top level standards that they're going to build their new product to. Are they can they document their code code development in a way that establishes that they've done their best to make it secure? Are they going to also roll out at the same time an easy way to report bugs so that when security researchers inevitably find something wrong, they're welcome to report it? And do we have a way of rapidly fixing that? Are we making sure that the connectivity piece of this is segregated from any operating systems that are important? This is essentially the 5-star program that the Cavalry just laid out for the auto industry, translated to virtually any product, because that's basically a good model for what I consider to be pretty much best practices today in terms of the security of the Internet of Things. Do that, my recommendation would be, great, you've put yourself at the high end of this, and you're going to have a lot of protection against liability when and if this ever comes back to bite you. The real tougher point, and this also gets back to policy, is when do we do this? Because I want you to start spending the money on security on the day you start writing the first line of code. And most product developers want to wait until they know whether or not the product will be useful.
Right.
Because building in security to each of the 1,000 failed devices that you try before you find one that actually sells is a bit of a... So we're going to have to negotiate a way forward in a time frame. You can invest in the secure software development early, and maybe we'll put the reporting and the bug bounty and things like that at the back end later.
Right.
But I would tell everybody, and this would be my final point, that there is no silver bullet. There is no way to eliminate the risk, and therefore no way to eliminate the potential liability. This is all about risk management, and it's about taking reasonable steps to reduce your risk, both of harm and therefore of liability from the harm, rather than thinking about elimination. Oh, yeah. Resiliency. That's the other thing. I didn't mention that, but do you build it so that it can, we can fix it and come back online really quickly without too much problem?
Right. You talked out in Las Vegas about this idea, this notion of commercially reasonable steps or unreasonable steps. You mentioned the Patco Insurance versus People's Bank case, which is about a kind of account hijack data or money transfer that happened as a result of an account hijack for a small construction company. And that the bank was found to be not taking commercially reasonable steps. Is that something that we're going to see reapplied in different contexts. For example, around some of these connected devices. Well, you implemented the features, but you didn't do so in a way that is commercially reasonable.
I think that's exactly right. Some form of reasonableness is going to be required of manufacturers and implementers of new systems, intermediaries who use those systems. The PATCO case is a really good example where a very unusual transfer of all the funds of the PATCO construction company to a bank in Romania actually alerted their internal "this is strange" system, and yet the bank decided to ignore that because the transfer had come in with the username and password authentication, and they felt that they were obliged to implement the transfer without circling back and double checking with PATCO to see if it really wanted to transfer all of its money to Romania. Of course, it was a criminal gang and everything that happened. And the court, I think, correctly said that the bank's failure to even follow its own alert system was not a commercially reasonable step. The big money question for everybody is what's going to define commercial reasonableness? Where's the standard going to come from?
It sounds like a fishy notion.
Typically, it's not so fishy. Typically, it comes from standard-setting organizations, whether it's it's going to be the National Highway Transportation Administration, the NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology, which just released a cybersecurity framework. Whether all of these we're in that phase where we're going to be developing standards. The standards for cybersecurity for non-commercial applications like electric grids are probably going to look a bit different from those for consumer products like medical pumps, but there's going to be a commonality of those, and we are starting to think of what best practices might be. So again, I think commercial reasonableness will be the touchstone for liability, and the way to avoid it will be to go out and try and find those standards and do your best to kind of come within the zone of them.
With the notion being that you're not immunizing yourself against lawsuits, but you are making it more likely that the outcome of those suits is going to be favorable to you.
That's right. There's no such thing as outlawing the suit. Period. Full stop. End of story.
Right.
Outlawing liability. So immunizing.
Right.
What it can get you is a good protection. Make yourself a hard target, pretty much.
Right. So you move in the milieu of Washington, D.C. in policy circles, both with Chertoff Group, with Red Branch, and so on. What is the conversation right now around some of these issues? There's certainly a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt about Internet of Things and security. But what are you hearing, and where do you think things stand?
Well, I mean, that's a great question. I think there is a lot of FUD, just as there is over cybersecurity writ large for the larger industrial SCADA systems. I would say that the Internet of Things is not reached the level of hysteria that we currently have about a larger scale attacks on the transportation system, the electric grid, of the financial industry. And frankly, that's probably right in terms of national security issues, right? In terms of your and my personal interests, the consumer products are going to probably predominate because pretty soon we're all going to own them, and we're all going to have vulnerabilities. But in terms of what the U.S. federal government needs to be worried about, the Internet of Things is second order after the larger SCADA attacks. I'm not sure how long that will last. I think, again, that will probably flip, and there will be a Pinto moment, right? Or our friend Josh Corman, who you've spoken of, he sometimes likes to call it the Cuyahoga River moment, which is when the river in Cleveland went on fire. and started burning. That was the environmental industry's equivalent of the Pinto moment. And
maybe there is something to this pollution stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And
the water's on fire.
And we in the Internet of Things are waiting for our Pinto moment, our Cuyahoga moment.
Right.
Probably, it's sad to say that even though you and I are talking about this and trying to get ahead of the curve, I think it's probably fair to say that congressional attention will not really become sustained and peaked until we have some tragedy.
Right.
19 dead when a Google driverless car runs into a children's school bus.
Right.
Which would be very, very sad.
There are dangers on both sides, right? So on some issues like computer crime, it seems like Congress got out early, and there are a lot of sort of, was it because of the movie War Games that came out and scared the bejesus out of everybody or what? And on others, the Congress has failed to act, data breach being a classic example, despite, clear and evident pain that is not local or regional but national. You've warned against, or you've warned about letting the sort of tort lawyers sort it out. In other words, making policy by kind of de facto policy by just letting the lawsuits kind of sort it all out. What are the dangers of that, I guess, just to get you to sort of rehearse that thought? But
well, there are many. Not the least of which we've already touched on, which is that there are tort lawyers in 50 states, and so we'll have 50 different standards. And anybody who manufactures a car or a refrigerator, a medical device, or any other consumer object will have 50 different rules to follow unless there is uniformity. The second, of course, is that tort law is notoriously idiosyncratic. It is the product of common law development involving jurors. Most juries have a great deal of common sense, and we can probably trust them to get it close to right. But anybody who's studied the history of tort law in the last 30 years is equally well aware that there are lots and lots of outlier verdicts and windfall profits that are out there that wind up killing industries, destroying companies, that sort of thing. It would,
asbestos, right?
What?
Asbestos.
Yes, asbestos is a great example. It had its problems, but and some. Let's be fair. Some of these things deserve to be.
Of course, yeah. Right.
But it's more of a crapshoot, it tends, I think, with coders in your group, that it tends to regress to the mean. So it tends, in the long run, even in tort law, to define the right standards. We don't have a lot of strange verdicts in auto accidents anymore, right? Because we've had a lot of experience with it and all. But along the way, a lot of strange verdicts were handed down. The same with medical malpractice. It's regressing towards the mean, but along the way, a lot of doctors got hit with really weird judgments. And to be fair, on the other side, a lot of doctors got away with murder.
Yeah,
right.
Literally, right. How important is the? This will kind of be my last question because I know you've got other stuff to do. The insurance industry. There's a lot of talk now about cyber insurance. More companies looking for cyber insurance. I think the Target breach had something to do with that, where they had kind of cobbled together a fair amount of coverage, cyber breach coverage, that they're now obviously calling in. But how important is getting the insurance industry to help offset some of these risks in getting achieving what you've talked about, which is really getting companies to start to internalize some of the costs of insecure products?
I think it's absolutely essential. You're right about cyber insurance, but it's mostly all data breach insurance right now.
Right.
And the reason it's data breach insurance, of course, is because we actually have enough information, we've had enough data breaches, sadly, that insurance companies can price the risk, can say what the problem, how much it will cost, and then they know how much to charge.
Right.
We haven't gotten there for the Internet of Things yet. or even for cybersecurity for large-scale industrial complexes. The only company I know that's issuing policies like that is AIG, and frankly, I think they're guessing more than anything else as to what the right cost should be. I would very much like to see insurance companies able to write this policy, because obviously with liability, you drive insurance and then insurers turn around and drive compliance and audit their customers to make them up to standard. So it's all good, right? They make people do what they should, because they charge them different prices based upon whether or not they do. So one of the areas that I really would like to focus on personally over the next 5 years is finding a way to educate the insurance companies as to the opportunities here, but also help them by developing risk models, compliance systems, so that they can actually get a sense of how much all of this should cost, so that they can actually price the risk, make a little money, which is what they're in the business for, but also spread the risk around.
Great. Paul, thank you so much for taking the time out of your Friday afternoon to talk with us here at Security Ledger. I think it's been a great conversation. Before we go, anything that you want to say that I didn't ask you about?
No, I think we've covered it all. Send me a link when this goes up so I can tweet it out to all my 220 followers or whatever. But it's always a great pleasure to be here. I guess I'd just end by saying the future of the Internet of Things is now. But if the future of the Internet of Things is now, then the future of the security of the Internet of Things is also now.
Great. Paul Rosenzweig is the founder and principal at Red Branch Consulting. He's also a senior advisor to the Chertoff Group, and he was here talking with us at the Security Ledger about the Internet of Things, risk, law, and pretty much everything that's to come if you are an Internet security Internet of Things business. So, Paul, thank you so much for taking the time, and I'm sure we will end up talking again sometime soon.
Excellent. Thanks a lot for having me on.
No problem. Our pleasure. Take care.
Sorry about the hand there.
No worries. Bye.
Bye-bye.